How are y'all doing? Are you doing good? So good. Today is going to be a wonderful morning, and we're going to be jumping into more of the conversation around there. Last Sunday, for those of y'all that were here last Sunday, I know that we have a short attention span, but last Sunday was such a I personally got so much out of the life of Abram going from here to there. Did that resonate with anybody last week? Of just, man, there are so many comforts that we gain in life. And I believe that God perpetually calls us to come out from comforts and start walking on this very risky, adventurous journey with Him, where He reveals Himself to us and reveals Himself through us. And it's just a profound experience when you get to the place of leaving here and going there. There's some questions I want to ask us this morning. I want to ask, how much resolve exists in each of you? How much resolve is within you to hold fast to the promises of God? How much resolve exists within you to hold fast to God as He transforms your life in the barrage of twists and turns that happen in life that do the transforming work? How much resolve do you have to walk undeterred, even when everything around you seems absurd and shaky? How much resolve is in your life? Do you know, I've learned something in this short 40 years of life and through reading the Word, that we can learn about one another's resolve by looking at the course of our history, our own personal history, our own personal story. Your life is a testament to the extent of the resolve to hold on to God's promises, to hold on to His voice in your life. And there's all kinds of twists and turns in life that happen. There's all kinds of people in your life that will either speak life to you or speak ridiculousness to you. And so one will either strip away or one will foster the resolve within you. I want to set today with a little bit of understanding. Oftentimes I'll share a little bit about our life, and I just think it helps with some context. If I seem sporadic today, which I hope I'm not, but if I seem a little tangent-ish, I want to give some reasoning for that. This past week, we were in Indiana, and I didn't make this public last Sunday, but 10 days ago I learned that my stepfather had passed away, and just a long road that he walked, though he wasn't hospitalized for a long time. There's just a battle that he dealt with for a long time, and eventually it snagged a hold of his life. Thankfully, he is with Jesus, and we can celebrate that. On the way to Indiana, though, last Sunday, I also received a message from an individual that I went to Papua New Guinea with. And I don't have the picture of this gentleman on the screen for us today, but there's a pastor who hosted us when we were in Papua New Guinea. And we were there for a week, and we lived around, and we got to be very, very close with this individual. But he was really the hub of Papua New Guinea, particularly Port Moresby. And last Sunday when he was preaching, he had a massive stroke and passed away. And has left a tremendous void in the hearts of not only his immediate family, but also the church. And so there's all of that going on, all the while going through the joys of not getting any sleep because of a newborn in the house. And so I'm not going to predict the emotions that might come out on stage, but I'm going to attribute it to loss of loved ones and loss of sleep. All right? But I want to just share that with you. One, to let you know that anybody who's up here on the platform or preaching, they're human and go through human things. And so I'm just sharing life with y'all just so that you know that I'm navigating some of the same things that y'all navigate. And thank you for the prayers along the way. It's so much fun to all of us be here together and I'll do my best not to be distracted at Olivia on the front row, okay? But if I just jump off the stage and hold her for a minute, just give me my moment. There is where we've been for the last couple weeks. In order to get there, we have to leave here. And leaving here means leaving the comforts. Leaving comforts that have been crafted and tailor-made, where we just lean into those comforts. And God would say, I want you to leave those and go there to a place that I'm going to tell you about. And it's interesting to me that throughout Scripture, only a handful of times does God ever give the full details. Usually at the onset of him saying, I want you to go there, he just simply says that, I want you to go there. And our tendency is to be like, I'll go there, when you share the details. So then I know I can trust you. But that's the kicker. He will discover our level of trust as we begin to walk. And walk in the unknown. I might have led y'all to believe something that maybe isn't 100% accurate last week. See, Abram, when God showed up in Abram's life, he was 75 years old. Prior to that, we have no real nitty-gritty detail in his life. We don't even know if he was truly pursuing God. God just kind of shows up in his life. I wonder if God showed up in Abram's life because he saw his faithfulness at that time to his wife Sarah. If he's faithful to his wife, maybe he'll be faithful to me. Let's try this out on Abram. We don't know. We can speculate, but all we do know is that God showed up to Abram when he was 75 years old. And he says, I want you to leave your land, your relatives, and your father's house, everything where there would be promise for today and promise in your future. I want you to leave those things and go to where I'm going to tell you about. So he leaves, and the distance was about between like what it would be for Amherst to go to Atlanta. And when he gets there, he builds an altar, because at that moment, at the oak of Morah, God shares with him, this is the land that is going to belong to your offspring. Now here's the part that could have been misleading. I might have led you to believe that the there that God was leading him to was the oak at Morah. When actuality, in all truthfulness, there were multiple theirs in Abram's life, because God told him to move on from there. He went on from there to go to another there. And what did he do at the new there? He built an altar. We have 25 years of Abram's life. We pick up the scene on him when he's 75. For the next 25 years, we have some detail of what happened in his life. And then at 99 years old, God begins to make the promise a reality. And that's where we're going to pick up this morning. The reason why I started us off by asking about your resolve is because I believe that we by nature are very fragile in our resolve. God has spoken promises to you. I know that because there are some promises that are found in the Word that are collateral, that are universal, that are cross-generational, that are for everyone. And so there are universal promises. Then I also believe that there are specific promises that God will speak to those who have an ear bent towards hearing His voice, which requires time. So for those of you that have put in the time to hear the voice of God and He has spoken some things to you, some of y'all might be wondering when He's going to start doing the things that He spoke to you about. That's why I asked you the question, what is the depth of resolve within you? Because I've found to be true within myself that my resolve is pitiful at times. And let me be completely honest, my resolve stinks. I throw tantrums more than I trust. I pout more than I stand on promises. And so I ask the question because we are all human who are in this relationship with God where He speaks promises, and then it's up to us in our day-to-day living as to how deeply we are going to get entrenched into His promises. Our greatest challenge in the world that we live in is time, a sense of urgency. Right now, just by statistics, I bet you there is a man in here who is counting down the minutes to eat lunch. Struggle's real, bro. I get it. Like, I didn't get breakfast this morning, okay? I had a Fireball and a breath mint. Okay, that's what I'm going on. But we want to get through on our time. That's really interesting, an interesting difference between our culture and cultures around the rest of the world. You know that most other cultures are not time sensitive. So our biggest challenge as a Western culture is this thing about time. Because once a promise is spoken, the clock starts. Okay, God, it's been like 10 seconds. When's the promise going to be fulfilled? When are you going to move? It's a minute now. Are you kidding me? This minute has felt like a lifetime. I think I really love God, okay? The reason why I say that is because where He has been leading us, think about the last series. The last series that we went through is Wait for It. The reason why it's important for us to develop the discipline of waiting is because God speaks promises and we have to wait for the promises to be realized. So, between here and there requires the discipline of actively waiting. In that time, in that window of actively waiting, that's what reveals the depth of your resolve. Am I losing anybody yet? Our resolve is discerned by our capacity to wait. We have 25 years of Abram's life. And within that 25 years, he's lied about Sarah being his wife. He's actually tried to convince a couple other kings, no, she's my sister. He wasn't lying because this is odd and this isn't like accepted in our culture today, but Abram and Sarah have the same dad but different moms. It's weird, I know, we're not going to get into that part of the scripture this morning. So he wasn't lying about it, but he kind of was because they were married. He did that twice. One of those times was after God changed his name, where God put his self in Abram's name and became Abraham. So the part, that part of his name, that's like God saying, I'm coming into your name. The next portion of Scripture is Abraham lying about Sarah being his sister. How does that happen? You'd think a changed name is a changed DNA and a changed whatever, but he's still wrestling with the same stuff. What else happened? God showed up again and reminded him that you're going to be a father of many nations. He's moved around a lot. Many of the places that he would go to, all of the different there moments of Abraham's life, what he became excellent at was building altars. And so here we go. Oh, here's one of the last things that he did. At year 11, after the promise was spoken, Abram at that time and Sarai at that time, Sarai comes to Abram and be like, listen, it's been 11 years. That's a really strong resolve to stand on God's promises. But got no bread in the oven. Nothing's happening. So, I have this little girl who follows me around, and she belongs to me. She's an Egyptian. Why don't you and her go make a baby? So they do. And she gives birth to a child, and they name him Ishmael. And God says, no, that's not how the promise is going to be fulfilled. So I find some comfort in the thinking that Abram has, where he struggles to not take matters into his own hands, and yet he still relents, and he tries to take matters into his own hands and just makes things more murky. I don't know if that resonates with anybody. But it is always better and it's preferred that if it seems like nothing's happening, there is so much happening in the non-happening because your heart is getting revealed to our Father. Yeah, he knows it already, but he's letting it blossom. And so we have a man who's lied about his wife twice, who has had an illegitimate child, and all of these other things go on in life to bring us 10 chapters beyond where we were last Sunday into Genesis chapter 22. Are y'all ready? Okay, good. Father, help us. The very end of chapter 21, it reads like this: And Abraham lived as a foreigner in the land of the Philistines for many days. At this point, Isaac has been born. Moses, I do that all the time. Moses, I'm just throwing it in there to make sure you guys are listening. Abraham is probably 105-ish, and he lives a little bit more time in the land. And where we pick up in chapter 22, it could be guessed that Abraham is about 110, which would make Isaac around 10 years old. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. Here I am, he answered. Take your son, he said, your only son, Isaac, whom you love. Go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will tell you about. What is it about God giving Abram instructions where he's like, just go and I'm going to tell you about it? So, in my mind, there's a song that plays in the background. Hold up, wait a minute. Anyways, so I think Abram, if the song existed, Abraham would have been like, hold up, wait a minute. I've just enjoyed this promise that you've been speaking to me for the past 25 years. And yeah, I messed up a few times, but I'm living in the reality of the promise where my son has been born, and I've enjoyed him as my son for the last 10 years or so. And you want me to do what? I have another son, Ishmael. That's not the one. That's the son that was born on your terms. Then there's the son that was a miraculous event in your family's life. That son. I want you to take him to a mountain I'm going to tell you about and offer him there. We don't get the narrative where Abraham wrestled with it, probably because at this point in Abraham's life, he has 25 years plus 10 more with Isaac of following potentially the absurdity of God directing his life. To the ordinary person who doesn't have a heart for God, these would seem like absurd things, very irresponsible things. But Abraham had attuned his ear to God's voice, and so there is no narrative. If there were a narrative, it would be there. And the reason why I say that is because Abraham threw more of a fit over God wiping out Sodom and Gomorrah than he kicked and screamed against God wanting him to sacrifice his own son. That's really strange to me. He would plead with God multiple times not to destroy a city, but when it comes to his own son, he was more willing. Why? We have to ask ourselves why. We'll get there in a moment. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took with him two of his young men and his son Isaac. Abraham split wood for a burnt offering and set out to go to the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Then Abraham said to his young men, listen to this, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there. We have yet another here to there moment with Abraham. The boy and I will go over there to worship, and then we'll come back to you. It's interesting. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. In his hand, he took the fire and the sacrificial knife, and the two of them walked together. Then Isaac spoke to his father, Abraham, and said, I would imagine, so 10 years old, Aubrey's about to be 10, and so I'm sitting there thinking about how a 10-year-old would ask this question, right? I imagine they're walking together, and he's just kind of like tugging on his cloak, like, hey, Dad, I know you're kind of forgetful sometimes. So we have the fire, and we have all the stuff, all the wood. I know you probably know the answer to this, but where's the offering for the sacrifice? Where's the lamb for the sacrifice? And Abraham answered, God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Then the two of them walked on together. No more conversation. When they arrived at the place that God had told him about, Abraham built the altar there and arranged the wood. He bound his son Isaac and placed him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out and took the knife to slaughter his son. This is a dramatic scene right here, right? But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham! And he replied, here I am. And then he said, do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your only son from me. Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in the thicket by its horns, and so Abraham went and took the ram and offered it as the burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham named that place, the Lord will provide. So today it is said, it will be provided on the Lord's mountain. I want to share with you some things it was so exciting to me to see this play out, because this is really so much a picture of our own life. At the moment God speaks a promise over our life, at the onset, I would almost bank on it that all you have to work with is generalities. I have plans and I have a future for you type of generalities. And what's interesting to me, so when we go from Abram to Abraham, the narrative would go something like this. Abram, 75 years old, God shows up. I want you to leave here to go there, to a place I'm going to tell you about. Generality. Specific about leaving, but general about going where. And so he shows up to what would be perceived as the location, but it was just one of the theirs. Y'all catch what I'm saying there? There were multiple there landing spots in Abram's life that would become more refined and more specific over the course of time. And all of the different theirs that Abram landed at would build to the moment. And it would build to the there. The reason why this is so significant is because if we're not careful, we will get frustrated going from there to there, not seeing that each landing spot is a building block to the ultimate, what we might call the converging there. The there. So there's going to be multiple theirs in your life. You're going to be led there, and God's going to do something in your life there. Then He's going to send you from there to another there. And what's required of us is a certain resolve. What's required of us is a certain perpetual faith in the promises that God has spoken. And here's a challenge that we all are going to be faced with. We have the starting block of where God spoke the promise. And we might have even told some people about what God has in store for our life, but what they're going to observe is a life continuously lived of unfulfilled promises, according to their perception. You think about that. Already, the promise that God spoke to Abram and Sarah was ridiculous. I don't see a whole lot of 75-year-olds birthing children. And that's like old school Bible days, right? Like in modern technology, we still don't see like women having children well advanced in age, right? Unless there's some recent story that I'm not aware of. But here's this promise, and each passing year, Abram and Sarai become more and more crazy. It's okay, Abram, it's time for you to go to the home. You know, the assisted living home with padded rooms. And Sarai, you know, here's some yarn and some needles. Just comment on the you're going to have a baby thing. At 99, Abraham is 99 when that promise is fulfilled. He had been going from there to there, becoming an excellent builder of altars. I want to point out something, though. Where we read today, the verbiage is much more specific. It's much more refined. There's a progression throughout Abraham's life where it's not just a mountain, but it's the place. It's not just living in the land during these days, but it came to the morning and then on the third day. Everything in the last 25 years has been building to the moment. Resolve, faith, standing on God's promises no matter how absurd you might look to everyone else. You contend for God's promises. You stand on God's promises. You be okay looking absurd to others because you're standing on God's promises. I want to reread this, and I want to emphasize something to you and help us catch. I'm going to throw out something, but longevity will develop specificity. I'm going to say that one more time. We know what specificity is, right? Specifics. Longevity means long term. You want to see the promises of God delivered and unfolded in your life? You have to determine right now that you are on the long road with Him. Because there are promises that are not drive-through promises. These are promises where you grow your own meat. You raise your own crops. You want a meal that you're going to enjoy, but you know it's going to take you years to fully enjoy it. And you're okay with it. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham, here I am, he answered. Take your son. I wonder if the wheels were turning in Abraham's mind. I got two. Maybe he means Ishmael. Take your son, your only son, Isaac. Okay. You mean Isaac, the one who you love. Go to the land, go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering, on one of the mountains that I will tell you about. So Abraham got up early in the morning, saddled his donkey, took with him two of his young men and his son Isaac. He split wood. Later on, it will say, the wood. Later on, it will say, the altar. All along, Abram had been building altars to prepare him for the altar. He split wood for a burnt offering, and he set out to go to the place God had told him about. On the third day, Abraham looked up and saw the place in the distance. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. The boy and I will go over there to worship. Then we'll come back to you. Abraham took the wood for the burnt offering and laid it on his son Isaac. So far, we catch in the specific nature of what God is speaking to Abraham. There are no generalities here. There are no guessing games here. This is specific information. This is specific steps. In his hand, he took the fire and the sacrificial knife, and the two of them walked on together. Isaac asked his father, the fire and the wood are here, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering? God himself will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. Then the two of them walked on together. When they arrived at the place that God had told him about, Abraham built the altar. We can read the rest of the story and how it plays out, but here's what's so crazy about this. For the last 25 years, Abraham has been following God to come to this moment. What a peculiar spot to be in, where you have shown so much resolve to stand on the promises of God, no matter how ridiculous you may seem. And now, at the year 99, God shows himself faithful. And he's been faithful all along, but he makes the promise happen. You are beside yourself because the promise, you are literally holding the promise in your hands. The child is weaned and they live together. They enjoy walks together. They have the father-son talks together. And God shows up to test Abraham. Why does God test Abraham? The same reason he will test each and every one of us. Because we are so prone to be more enamored with the promise than the promise giver. I got what you wanted to give me. I'm good. I don't need to build an altar anymore. I don't need to look ridiculous anymore. I'm just going to wrap my arms around the promise and just find my identity in the promise. We are so prone to be so confounded, or not confounded, but just wrapped up in his promise rather than the one who gives the promises. And I think the moment God had that conversation with Abraham, he knew what the test was. why. I wish there were different tests, but it seems like God has a way of giving and requesting us to be open-handed with it. I won't say give it back, but just to be open-handed. It's no different than what we do on dedication Sundays when we bring children up here and we pray over them that we're going to dedicate them. Father, thank you for giving us this child. Now we dedicate them to you. But even I wrestle with my own children, trusting them with him, as if I can care better for them than he can. This plays out in a whole bunch of different ways. I want to walk down a road with y'all just in my own personal life. And y'all know us by now that when I share stories of what God has done, I by no means want to give the impression that I'm touting how great I am. Do I have your trust that when I share these things that you don't think that I'm up here just standing like, yeah, I'll just be like me because I got it figured out? That's not at all what I'm trying to get at here. I was, being a part of a divorced family, I was speculative that I would find the one. That was just branded in me from the moment my parents got divorced. Like I knew I would marry, I just wanted to make sure that I would marry the one. And I'm so thankful that at the end of my freshman year, when I had a conversation with God, and I said, God, is Summer the one? Because I had prayed every day in my junior year, senior year of high school, God, you know who you're working with. You know how you need to speak. I just don't want to miss the one that you want me to spend the rest of my life with. And it's the only time that I've heard God in an audible whisper when he says, yes. Yes. So I love that he showed me the one. How interesting it is, though, that during our dating days that we would dream about what our life would be like together. We would forecast what our days would be like together. What would God do through us? And one of the most memorable conversations that we had was that we wanted to adopt. We wanted to adopt a baby from a different culture, a different ethnicity. And that was something that God had planted within both of us. Summer had been carrying that with her for a very long time, before we even met each other. And it's a promise that she has stood on for a long, long time. It was one that I was so open to, but here's the deal. I'm kind of like Abram. I was like, that can only happen one of two ways, and we can have a child of another ethnicity one of two ways, and I'm not okay with one of them. And so now we have a 3-week-old baby in our home who is just a tremendous delight, but she is a promise 22 years in the making. And I just like all promises, I believe that the peripheral details around that little girl's life is going to exceed our expectation. Here's why this story is so crazy to me. We were holding out for a promise for a really long time, always curious as to how and when it would happen. And when it happened, there are some similarities to what Abraham went through that we went through. You see, on the 17th, that was a Sunday, on the 18th, we went home with Olivia. And in our emotions of joy and like we were just staring at her like, oh my gosh, she's right here. I mean, we were just beside ourselves. Tuesday, we got a call from our attorney that birth mom wanted her back. So, all this time, especially, it really picked up in 2018 where God was saying, be prepared for your family to grow. Be prepared. Like there were multiple altars that are written in my journal where God specifically spoke that this is going to happen. And I can't tell you the level of confusion in my mind and my heart to receive a call that what was, I don't want to overstate this, but the promise that we were anticipating is now in our arms, and now we need to take her back. So Tuesday, the 19th, is a day that I will never forget, where Todd Rainey drove my car with me in it and Olivia back to birth mom. And for the next 21 hours, we mourned, we wailed, and we were so immediately attached to this little girl. Our girls handled it like champs, but they were sobbing. So 21 hours of unknown. And then the next morning at 9 o'clock, we received a message from birth mom of I wanted to go through this to see if I can do this, and I just know that it's the right decision to, and I've saved this message because these words are so profound. My decision is to give her to your family. We were there in 15 minutes. And so that whole process of receiving and then giving back and then receiving. In that 21 hours, I believe that God spoke some things that I've still yet to fully unpack. But yes, we were saddened to take her to the birth mom. But during that time, perspective was gained where my heart ached for the birth mom. Because, man, not by experience, but just by observation, could I even begin to understand the weight of the decision that she was making. And so we grieved for her. And when we showed up the next morning to put Olivia back in the car, I think the joy had a deeper context to it than it did on Monday. See, there are promises that God has spoken to you. Be okay looking ridiculous while you wait. Be okay that once the promise is realized or received, be okay and determine right now to receive it with open hands, because, yes, the promise is for you to enjoy, but the promise always goes back to Him. Always. So, I know that not everybody in here is like sign up for adoption and you have that same carbon copy narrative going on, but there are definitely promises that God has spoken where some of you are starting to feel ridiculous, almost as if you're 75 years old waiting to have a child. Ridiculous. What's required of you? Circle around altars that have been built as you make your way to the altar. As you make your way to the moment. So this morning, what I want to encourage you to do is respond to this question. What specifics is God bringing together on your way there? You may feel like you're just walking in generalities, but you need to take note of the generalities because they are being refined to be specifics that are going to just blow your mind when that specific moment happens. I don't expect a lot of connection cards with this question, by the way. Because I don't know that we're the best at identifying the generalities until the specific moment has happened. And then we look hindsight at all that God has done along the way to prepare us for the moment. But right now, do your best to write down the specifics that God is bringing together. Think about geographical places that you have been. What did God show you there? Think about the painful moment, your most painful moments. What did God show you there? Think about your most joy-filled moments. What did God do there? Those are the specifics that you need to be aware of.